Hi, everybody. So today I am going to just introduce you to integers and absolute value. For Indiana, this is State Standard 7C1. Let's get started. Okay, so the set of integers, that would be your negatives, your positives, and zero. I think of zero like the starting space on a board game. It's your neutral spot. In this particular board game, when you move to the left, those are your negatives, and when you move to the right, those are your positives. Now, I have written there no fractions and decimals. It doesn't mean that you'll never have negative fractions or decimals, just when we're talking about what the set of integers include, there are no fractions and decimals. On your number line, negatives count backwards, and those go to the left of zero. We know that positives are to the right of zero. The farther left you travel, the more negative your numbers get, the smaller your numbers get. So later when we talk about comparing, we want to think back to this number line. If the numbers in question are more to the left, they're smaller. If they're more to the right, then they're bigger. The first thing you'll probably be asked to do is write an integer for some particular situation. If it's a positive number, you do not have to put a positive sign in front of it. Just put the number. Negative, though, you have to remember to put that negative sign. Negatives are any kind of decrease. Anytime you're losing points or you're taking away money, if you're moving in a down negative direction. If you're adding on, you're increasing, you're depositing, you're winning, you're ascending up in a positive direction, all those would be your positive numbers. So a deposit of 25, deposit is when you add money into your bank account. So that would just be a normal positive 25. Don't put the plus sign, just put 25. If you lose 10 points, that would be represented with a negative 10. A diver descends 20 feet below the surface of the water, so that's a negative 20. If you gain 35 yards, that's a positive, so 35. Withdrawal is the opposite of depositing in your bank account. Withdrawal is when you take money out, so I would use a negative 50 for that. Moving on, the next thing that you're usually asked to do in this section is to compare and order your integers. So think back to that number line that we talked about. I also think of it like money. What's better for your money? What's not so good for your money? You probably learned when you were small and you're comparing with less than, greater than, and equal. Think of them like an alligator mouth, and your alligator's hungry. It always wants to eat the bigger number. I always do Pac-Man simply because I can draw Pac-Man. I can't draw an alligator. So less than would be this way. Pac-Man's eating the number on the right. This one's greater than. Pac-Man's eating the number on the left. For example, 1, negative 12 on my number line is further to the left, so it's smaller. For money, even though they're both negative and neither one is good, negative 8's a little bit better. It's a little bit closer to getting out of that hole. So negative 12 is less than negative 8. 0 and negative 2. 0 is greater than negative 2. It's better to have no money than to owe someone money. Negative 5 and negative 6. Negative 5 is more to the right on your number line. So even though they're close, negative 5 is a little bit greater. From least to greatest, positives are always going to be bigger than negatives. Think of it again like money. The one that's worse for your bank account, the smallest, the least amount, would be negative 7. So if I'm standing on negative 7 on my number line and I start walking to the right, the next number that I'm going to step on would be negative 2. Then would come 0. Keep moving to the right. Then you hit your 3 and your 4. Number 5, the furthest to the left, the worst of those numbers for my money would be negative 120. Now, standing on my number line, I'm going to keep walking to the right. The next one that I would hit would be negative 115, then negative 113, And finally, negative 110. Hopefully you're feeling like this is pretty easy breezy. Absolute value sounds a lot more intimidating than it actually is. Absolute value is just distance. It's just really asking you how many moves does it take to get to that number if you start at 0. Because it's distance, your answer is going to be positive. The only time you ever have a negative distance is if you're talking about elevation below sea level. This has nothing to do with sea level. It's just moves on a number line. I don't care if you're moving to the right or to the left, you're just moving. So on number 1, these bars are a shortcut way of saying find the absolute value. The absolute value of negative 2 is just 2 because it takes 2 moves to get there. Number 2, the absolute value of 8 is just 8. I'm not going to change the sign. Absolute value is not the same thing as just writing the opposite sign. It takes 8 moves to get there, so it's just an 8. The absolute value of 5 is 5. You don't need bars around your answer. Those bars are just a shortcut way of saying find the absolute value. They're part of the problem, not part of the answer. Number 4, the absolute value of negative 14. It takes 14 moves to get there. Number 5. So on number 5, I have a negative on the outside. In this case, it means opposite of. I want to start like order of operations where you start with your parentheses, same kind of thing. I'm going to start with the innermost part of the problem. So I'm going to do the absolute value of negative 3 and then start working my way outward. So in this case, I take the absolute value of negative 3, which is 3. This means now change the sign. Now write the opposite of that. So instead of writing a positive 3, I'm going to write a negative 3. Number 6, start inside your bars first. The absolute value of 6 is 6. And now write the negative of that, the opposite of that. So negative 6. Number 7, the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. The absolute value of 4 is also a 4. Those two expressions are equivalent. They're equal. Finally, number 8, inside the bars, the absolute value of negative 9 is 9. The negative on the outside means make that a negative 9. Over here, it's just the absolute value of negative 9, which is 9. So I want to put a less than in between those. The last thing I want to talk to you about today is opposites. I kind of alluded to this on the page before when I was talking about the negative sign outside the absolute value bars. It means change the sign or opposite of. That's what we'll be doing here. Opposite means change the sign. 2 opposite numbers have the same absolute value, but one's going to be on the left of 0 and one's going to be on the right of 0. So for your examples, number 1, the opposite of negative 11, just change the sign. It's 11. Number 2, the opposite of 16, just change the sign. It's a negative 16. Now 3, 4, and 5, every time I show these in my classroom, I make them bigger and bigger every time and just completely ridiculous. But there's a shortcut to these. So even though they look super fancy dancy and intimidating, they're really not at all. Number 3, I've got negative 1. It's not absolute value. That set of parentheses is just saying, hey, look at me, I'm a negative number. So I have negative 1, and then I want the opposite of that. So it's positive 1. When we did absolute value, the negative outside does not cancel with the negative inside. But with parentheses, you might have heard this before, those 2 negatives come together to make a positive. We also in my classroom call these face problems. So it said this, the opposite of negative 1. I know this is goofy, but that's how we remember stuff in my class, by being goofy. So look, I have 2 eyes, and here's the big curvy nose. It makes a face. Maybe you see it, maybe you don't, but if you're in my class and you ever hear me saying face problem, we know that means that the 2 negatives come together to make a positive. So this just becomes a 1. Number 4, I'm going to start inside and work my way out. So I have a negative 1. The opposite of that is 1. The opposite of that is negative 1. Or look, these two come together. It's a face problem. They form a positive. But then I have this guy left out over here. He doesn't have a partner. There's nobody for him to buddy up with. He's sad. He's in a negative mood. So he makes the whole answer negative. Number 5, start inside, work your way out. I have a -1. The opposite is a 1. The opposite is a -1. The opposite is a 1. Or here's face. Those two buddy up and make a positive. Here's a face. Those two buddy up and make a positive. Everybody has a partner. Everybody's happy. Everybody's in a positive mood. So it's a positive answer. So here's your shortcut. On number 3, I had 2 negative signs. That's an even number. I got a positive answer. Number 5, I had 4 negative signs. That's an even number. I got a positive answer. Number 4, I had 3 negative signs. That's an odd number. So I got a negative answer. If there's an odd number of negatives, somebody's always going to be left out without a partner. And because that makes him in a negative mood, the answer is always going to be negative. I hope that helps soon. Check back later for a video on adding integers. That'll be our next section. Thanks for watching.